Alright, Season 1 was really good, now let's move on to Season 2. Let's see if they keep this home streak going. And we start off the season with Bob Camp's solo directorial debut, In the Army. A pretty good start to the season. While it has some hit or miss jokes, it's still a really good episode. Now let's move on to Powdered Toast Man. Again, another good episode with a ton of funny moments. Now let's move on to Ren's Toothache. Yet again, another really good episode with a ton of funny moments, and even the ending was pretty wholesome. Like, it actually made me feel emotional over a toothache. Like, how? How do you do that? Now let's move on to Out West. It's an alright episode. It's not really that funny, but it's mostly safe from its animation. Like, the animation here really does show that Carbuncle Cartoons were the best animators on the show. Now, let's move on to Man's Best Friend. Ah yes, the infamous episode that quote-unquote got John K. fired from the show, even though the real reason why he was fired was because he was a pain in the ass to work with and treated his animators horribly. But besides that, this is one of my favorite episodes of the entire series. It is the perfect Ren and Stimpy episode for adults. Best of the season so far. Now let's move on to Rubber Nipple Salesman. Here is another one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. While I don't think it's as amazing as Man's Best Friend, there's still a lot of funny gags here, especially the Call the Police gag. That was really funny. Now let's move on to Sven Hoek. Yet another one of my favorite episodes of the entire show with amazing gags and great animation. Man, we're on a winning streak so far this season. Now let's move on to Haunted House. Fun fact, this was originally going to be a Tiny Toons episode, but was cancelled out of the storyboard phase, and it shows. It's not bad, but this doesn't really feel like an episode of the Ren and Stimpy Show, if you know what I mean. Now let's move on to Mad Dog Hoek. Another great episode with some really good animation and a really funny ending. Now let's move on to Big Baby Scam. Another decent episode. It's just a weaker version of The Boy Who Cried Rat in my opinion. Now let's move on to Dog Show. Another really good episode. I don't think it's as amazing as Man's Best Friend, but it's still a really good episode with a lot of funny gags and great animation. Now let's move on to Son of Stimpy. Yet another one of the show's best episodes by having great animation and some amazing gags, and also surprisingly heartwarming too. Now let's move on to Monkey See, Monkey Don't. What a boring one. This is honestly the very first bad episode of the series, as the gags aren't funny, and it's just boring. Worst of the season so far. Now let's move on to Fake Dad. This is a really good episode as there's a lot of funny gags in it, and the animation's pretty decent. Now let's move on to The Great Outdoors. The skinny dipping gag got a laugh out of me, but overall this episode is just alright. Now let's move on to The Cat Who Laid the Golden Hairball. Another boring one. It's not as boring as Monkey See, Monkey Don't because at least there was one or two jokes that made me laugh, but overall I'm not really a fan of this one. Now let's move on to Stimpy's Fan Club. Another one of my favorite episodes by having some really good gags and Chris Falusi giving out his best performance as Ren in my opinion, which is fitting because this would be the last time he would voice Ren. Now let's move on to A Visit to Anthony. Another great episode with some really good animation and some funny gags. And finally, to close off the season, we've got the Royal Canadian Kilted Yaxman. Surprise, surprise, another one of my favorite episodes of the entire show by having some really great carbuncle animation and some really amazing gags. Overall, Season 2 is the best season of the entire show so far. It has the most good episodes, and some of them are my all-time favorites from the entire show. Sadly, or thankfully, Season 2 would be the final season that John K. and his company Spunkwood would work on as they were later fired from Nickelodeon and replaced by their own studio, Games and Animation. So let's see if Season 3 will continue the same winning streak as Season 2.